Cocktail Sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
Okay, so how many people are actually deeply offended by swearing and random streams of obscenity? It doesn't really matter. I can't see your hands going up from the lights anyway. So thank you. I appreciate that introduction, and thanks for correcting the name of the company. Seeing as the rest of the employees would actually, they think that I'm just out here drinking. I told them I was going to something called Tech Cocktail, and they're like, oh, right. It's like, no, I'm working. I swear to God, I'm working. I'm working for you guys. Well, thanks for coming, and actually, thanks for you guys for putting this on. I actually definitely wouldn't be here without this invitation, so thank you very much. Okay, so I kind of asked, and I did a survey and trying to figure out what we should talk about here. So how many people here are actually in the middle of building a company or would say they're building a company? Just trying to get a feel. Or sort of self-described entrepreneurs?
Everyone put their hands up.
Yeah. How many people don't know why they're here or how they got here? All right, there are a few of you, at least you're honest, right? Because I'm definitely in that group. So it's, there was right before I came up here, somebody was like, well, you should do something like it's a sermon. It has 3 points, and you should have something to say on all 3 points, and then wrap it up. And you should take away something like wisdom. And what I can tell you are some of my own personal stats, which we collected one day. I helped start a company called Engine Yard with some friends of ours. And what we realized, we went around the table one day, and it was one of our first sort of wildly successful companies. And it was started by a bunch of engineers. We had been building applications using a language called Ruby and a framework called Rails. You guys heard of it? Yes. So we started building Ruby applications in 2006, which I know it doesn't seem that long ago, but that was like ancient history. And it was like trying to build like a B-17 using stone and lashing together like bamboo poles. It was arduous and painful. And so we came up with this idea that we were building applications so quickly that we couldn't find a place to host them. And the technical details are really not important, but what it was is we would literally build like a website in a week, which at the time was, my God, this is like, oh my God, are you guys on crack? You can't build a website in a week. We'd host it someplace, and then about 2 days later, our clients would call us up pissed off because their websites would be down, and it was because the way that people were used to hosting these applications was not the way that we were actually building and actually running these applications. So they kept turning off the wrong parts of the application. So imagine you hire a locksmith, he come in, changes your locks in about an hour, and then you come home after work the next day and you can't get back in because somebody else is like, oh, locks don't look like that, and then they change the keys. That's what they were doing. So we were like, well, screw it. Why don't we make a hosting company so we can host these things ourselves? And like all stupid engineers, we didn't know anything about product. So we didn't realize that hosting these applications was actually a broader problem, and we were supposed to be solving this problem for other people. And of course, the next thing we know, venture capitalists are at our door, whining us, dining us, and giving us money. So what's the point of this? The point of this is that we actually came up with a way to build something like EC2 a long time before EC2 existed. I know this is actually kind of very strange. Does anybody remember a time before Amazon owned everything that they ran on the web? Right, okay, there's one hand back there, right? So here's the clue, right? For some of you who are too young to remember this. Amazon sold fucking books, right? Now, I remember in like 4th grade, people telling me that books and libraries were really important, but I did not understand that it's a $1 trillion business, and that's what they meant, right? So at the time, we built something essentially that could have been EC2, but being stupid engineers, we're like, oh, thank God, we can now host these small web applications. So instead of actually deploying like the first cloud, we decided to start selling people hosting for Ruby on Rails applications for $100 a month. Mistake number 2, right? We then went off and took a whole bunch of venture capital and tried to build something and exploded. And that, in many ways, while as an educational experience, could very well have been mistake number 3. Because we didn't know what the hell we were doing, right? Long story short, the company actually, despite any of our involvement in it, actually turned out to be fairly successful and is still a going concern today. Which kind of brings me to my point, which is I'm going to ask, here's another survey question. How many people in here would describe themselves as serial entrepreneurs, or people who are some, a few, or, okay. Not as many as I would think. This is good, because what it really comes down to is how many people here would describe themselves as serial failures? Right. So back to the personal stat. The stat was this. We went around the table one day because we had just closed a round of funding, and if you've never actually had like a round of funding where somebody gives you one of those checks with way too many zeros on it, you're like, that's enough money to save Africa. And you want us to buy beer and video games? Really? So when you start doing something like that, what we did is we kind of went around the table and we said, how many companies actually have you built? Right? How many have you started? And as it turns out, amongst about the 5 or 6 of us at the table, the average number was 7 or 8, which meant 7 or 8 companies we had all built that had all been abject failures, or that we thought were going concerns, but a year later you're actually like, hey mom, you know that $1,000 I borrowed from you? You're not gonna see it again, right? So I think one of the things, if I were sort of like to dispel anything, and I certainly sure as hell don't have anything relating to wisdom unless it's about whiskey. I know everything about Scottish whiskey, so if you want to talk about that, I got something for you. But when it comes to starting and running companies, I can't really say much of anything except that probably the most important attribute that I can say any one person needs to have is no fear of failure, and more of an embracing of the fact that when you fail, you've got to learn something from it. It's funny, some other friends of mine, they started a company called GitHub. Some other friends of mine started another company called Heroku. I don't know if you guys are in the San Francisco tech scene, but these guys have actually done really well. Heroku got acquired for like, I don't know, $1 bazillion, $250 million by Salesforce and everything else. And what's funny is to go read the press reports, right, of how the company was built versus the reality of when we were all struggling to get beer money together, right? So there were so many turns, like blind alleys, missed opportunities, things we screwed up, things we didn't know, things we should have known, things that actually anybody who actually knew anything about building a company wouldn't have done. They were littered throughout the stories, but every single time when you actually read the funding document or the acquisition or the sale, it sounds like we were 16 geniuses just sitting around. We've envisioned cloud computing from day 0, and we always knew it would be this way, right? And I guess, and I'm kind of here from San Francisco to tell you, like, don't believe the fucking hype. It's like, it is not that. It is, I mean, in one sense, you've got, this guy is like, I knew for a fact that the generation of millennials was going to be online and only communicating using Facebook. Or the guy just wanted to get laid, right? Oh, come on, right? I mean, we don't actually think that Facebook was created to, like, connect people and put people together, do we? Okay, how about this? Snapchat. Do we believe that Snapchat was created to connect people and put them together? Right? So, I mean, the biggest lie, I think, in starting companies or building companies is that people have some idea of where they're going, you have some brilliant plan to get there, and you know everything that's going to happen along the way. And you're ready for all of those things, which is complete horseshit, right? Don't do that during your pitch meetings. Always tell them you know all those things and tell them that you're not full of horseshit. But the other person on the side of the desk, I mean, let's face it, if you knew it was going to happen, it wouldn't be that difficult and somebody else would have already done it, right? I mean, so the company I run now, Thunderbolt Labs, we actually ghostwrite software for people. And we started getting into this business because, frankly, we were a bunch of engineers after we left some of our last companies. And engineers are the worst product people ever. Right, we do things like, I don't know if there are any software developers in the room, but we write things like Emacs, which is an editor. So imagine the equivalent of Emacs is something like, imagine if every day you wanted to drive your car and you woke up every morning and there was a bucket of parts. And what you did is you put together the parts into a car, you drove it, then you parked it, and by the time you came back out again, the car had fallen apart and you had to put all the buckets and like the parts in the bucket back together again. That's how we design products for people for usability, right? Engineers are terrible at this stuff. So instead, what we did instead is we decided that we were going to build products for other people in the same way that some people might ghostwrite a novel. And I will tell you, in 2 years of doing this, what we have seen is more failure than you can put, I don't know, actually I can put a dollar amount on it because we build them for all of it. But that's not here nor there. But it's a continuing thing, right? Being consultants, one of the things that we realized is that our goal was to basically try and help people learn from failures that they might not necessarily have been directly involved in. That was one of the things that we saw our goal as consultants doing, because we saw a lot of startups with just, some ideas which were marginal, some ideas and people which were marginal. But all of them, the common thread through all of them is that the companies that did well, they failed in a way which actually allowed them to learn, and then they failed in a way which actually allowed them to continue. I always actually call this Cyrus's rule of existence, and Cyrus was our attorney for a very long time. And he said that your job in running a company is to avoid company-ending liability. That's it. Now, the funny thing is, the company-ending liability that you might have to avoid, especially in a startup situation, isn't always the one that you think that's going to happen, right? Company-ending liability doesn't come necessarily from running out of money. That's pretty common. Company-ending liability comes from when your co-founder gets married, right? And by the way, she hates you because they're going to have kids, and he needs a real job, right? It comes from the fact that your co-founder, who is like all into your product, and he's the guy who owns everything, and he's like, oh my God, I got into Harvard Law. And my parents, well, you know, they kind of pay my car payment, so I can't really commit the way that I thought it was going to. Or it comes from the fact that you get a cease and desist letter from somebody like Facebook, or, you know, or Candy Crush Saga. Like, I don't know if you guys have heard this one, that Candy Crush is now suing everybody who has Saga in their name. So the funny thing is, we've actually dealt with a lot of companies that have had various types of these sorts of failures, and it's never the ones that they were expecting. They had planned for the monetary stress. They had planned for any number of other types of arduous situations, but no matter how much they planned, they couldn't foresee all the twists and turns that were actually going to happen when they tried to build a company from scratch, right? And if you're starting something, and if you're actually building up a company, and if you want to call yourself an entrepreneur and you want to make something, and it's more than just you in, say, your bedroom, you're really trying to build something from scratch, and that's really difficult. And so far, the only tried and true tactic that we've ever seen to actually get through that is to be able to embrace with the failure, roll with the punches, and then move on with it. And I know of no recipe that can minimize. I have never seen a company that hasn't survived it, and I've never seen anybody that hasn't lied about it after they've made their huge exit, right? It's like, there's actually a really interesting conference that started in San Francisco. It was called FailCon. And if you guys ever get a chance to go, I highly recommend it, because FailCon was supposed to be an open and engaging environment for founders to talk about failure. No video recording, right? No tweets, no OHs, right? And when I went, it was probably one of the most enlightening things, because the other problem you have as an entrepreneur is that you end up hearing a lot of these things, like you can feel very alone, sitting there in your room, trying to think, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, why won't people just sign their pugs up for Facebook for pugs? Pug book is where it's at, right? It's like, you don't understand. Pugs are the most socially interactive dogs known to man. They actually have 63% longer tweets than everybody else. I mean, don't even get me started on the collies or the other people in the American Kennel Club, right? So you go to FailCon, and I'm sitting there, and what you get to hear are these people making the same stupid mistakes. Like, of course, there's a cone of silence around FailCon, but I can tell you, there are so many people that basically, essentially, made me feel like, oh, holy crap, I wasn't as dumb as I thought, and at least I'm smarter than that guy, right? So I guess we could highlight two things. One is, you know, you've got to be able to embrace failure if you're going to be an entrepreneur. And not everybody here wants to be, right? And by the way, if you had a day job and you want to keep it, that's perfectly sane, because I don't really know why anybody would want to start a company. But if you're going to, be prepared for the failure. Don't make that failure define you. Make it define one step in the journey that you have to take to get to where you think that you need to go. And then the other thing is to sort of remember that these sorts of groups, when you look to your left and you look to your right, your community of people and entrepreneurs, that's sort of the support infrastructure, and you have to realize that that person to your left or your right is actually probably going through the exact same thing you're going through now. Or they have already gone through that, and when you actually want to sit there and say, you know, as it turns out, my founder just left, and he started a company, and it looks a lot like what we were doing. Somebody in your community is going like, oh, I've done that. Here's an attorney that'll sue the hell out of him, right? Or don't be afraid to sit there and raise your hand and be like, holy shit, I'm having a really tough time with this. What should I do? And have somebody else say, oh, I screwed that up too. Here's how you fix it. Because part of the reason actually I came here is kind of like as a tech community tourist is because I actually have a fascination with communities and groups that get built, and San Francisco's culture is held up to be sort of one of those very, I don't know, highly emulated. I think that's fair. And in some parts that I think is great, other parts of it I'm not so sure why. Because every group and every community in and of itself is local, and it has things that San Francisco doesn't, right? San Francisco might have like a huge venture capital community. It might have a huge group of companies that are all much vaunted. But then again, we also have things like color. Does anybody know who these guys are? So I'm not sure I'm seeing enough heads nodding because we all laugh about it in San Francisco. Oh, yeah, go ahead. You want to tell the story? The short version?
Basically, took a bunch of money, failed the second time, and then gave back the money and worked for, I think they got acquired by Apple.
Yeah, I think the first number was the world's largest A round, 42 million. And so they failed to basically write Instagram.
And then they pivoted, right?
Yes, and they failed again.
Right.
So I'm not saying that you should always fail at this scale. But always keep it in the back of your mind that if you get 13 rockstar software developers, product managers, and people who have all had like Class A exits and Class A investors, and they get $42 million and they can't make Instagram, you've got to have a better shot than that, right? So I really appreciate your attention. If you always feel free to, us at Thunderbolt Labs will get the entire company, but if you actually have a question or if there's anything I could actually ever do for anybody, feel free to just drop me a line, send me an email. Even if it's just something like, hey, how do I sue my co-founder? Let me know. But thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. So we have a few minutes for questions. So if there's anybody that has a question,
There's a Q&A. Nobody
a little
told me
bit,
that.
yeah, a little bit, not a lot, just a little, couple questions, and then they can come track you down on
I
Twitter.
can't see anything, so you
Anybody
just,
have
just shout
anything?
them out.
Oh, one right here. Okay.
Top 3 Scotch whiskeys.
Ooh.
Fair question.
Okay. Number 1, Ardbeg Supernova, 2009. It was the original most peaty whiskey. That was actually the one which started the whole peaty whiskey revolution, which, by the way, all the old whiskeys are going away. Bowmore released something called the Trilogy, which actually was the black, the gold, and the white. And so the Bowmore, any of the Bowmore trilogies. In fact, they were so rare that when we went to the Bowmore distillery one time, we saw a box from the Trilogy. He was like, oh my God, you have a Trilogy? And the guy, the still me, is like, hell no, we can't afford that shit. Actually, it was like shite. I can't translate like the actual accent. It sounded like, and I'm like, what did he say? But anyway. And then the third one is got to be Lagavulin 16, one of the classic malts, which the sad part is it's going away. They don't really have, a lot of the stuff in Lagavulin 16 is actually like 20, 28, and like 23-year-old malt, so they don't make as much of it anymore. So those would be my 3. Good drinking questions.
Hi, great session, by the way. Thank you very much.
Oh, appreciate your attention.
So if you could go back today, how would you go about identifying and what would be your process for taking advantage of those missed opportunities that you talked about?
Oh, wow. Well, if I had a DeLorean, I'd get it up to 88 miles an hour. I'd then walk up to myself in whatever coffee shop I was in and slap the hell out of myself saying, you don't nearly know as much as you thought you were. Actually, I'll tell you what we did. I can tell you how we've improved it for Thunderbolt Labs, is I got an advisory board of people who were way smarter than me and had done this multiple times, and I met with them relentlessly every week. I hounded people every week and kept lunches on the books, and every time I said, hey, should I do this? 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 And I just kept doing that. And 9 times out of 10, they're like, no, that's fine. No, that's fine. No, that's fine. What the fuck are you doing? Like, there were a couple times that they kept us from going over a cliff because you get this tunnel vision when you're trying to build something. I mean, if you're going to build something, it takes a lot of time, effort, and attention, and you get tunnel vision, and you literally can't see the forest for the trees. And there were a couple times when I was focusing on a very small portion of it, and our advisory panel like really saved us. One of our advisors is a guy named Rob Mee. He built a company called Pivotal Labs, so he has 20 plus years of experience in building consulting and product companies. And then another one of our advisors was Sarah Tavel, and she helped get Pinterest started and funded. And so we were really lucky to be able to find people like that who would literally smack the hell out of us when we were about to do something stupid. So find somebody you trust to basically put you in your place and ask them. That would be my tip.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's hear it for Randall.